boogeyman.
Run, Randy, run!
Welcome to the Inferno. I'm Papa John, and I'm here to guide you through all the hellish sides of horror. And today we are talking about Fear Street Part 2, 1978. And if you recall, I was actually fairly mixed on 1994, the first part of the Fear Street trilogy. I was fairly mixed on it, but did I enjoy Fear Street Part 2? I will say I thought it was a giant step up. Now, from what I've seen, it's been kind of mixed in terms of people who prefer Part 1 and people who prefer Part 2. But like I said, I think it's a giant step up. And so let's get into it. So in Fear Street Part 2, you pick up with the main character from Part 1 and her brother as they take Sam, who's been possessed by a witch, to see Berman. And then C. Berman basically sits them down, tells them the story of what happened at Camp Nightwing in 1978. And so I'm going to start off by elaborating a little bit on some of my issues with 1994. And the main thing I'm going to say is in 1994, the characters, I didn't feel chemistry with any of the characters. You know, one relationship felt very forced. And then there's even a scene where someone, I guess, has a relationship with themselves. And that scene was very unnecessary and forced and weird. And so overall, none of the cast really had chemistry except for the main couple. And even the main couple, it was always like they were calm or yelling at each other. It was always like one or the other. There was no build up to the yelling. And so I couldn't stand some of that. So you had just a bunch of over-the-top teenage soap opera drama. That's what the first movie really felt like. It had a lot of that in it. This movie, on the other hand, just a bunch of fun campground characters getting slashed apart, and I was all there for it. You know, the characters, yeah, they're not the most fleshed out in the world, but they all feel natural. They all have chemistry with each other. None of the relationships feel forced, and so you just feel like you're in this campground group with these counselors and these kids. I mean, you have Ziggy and Cindy. They feel like sisters, and they actually feel like sisters. You can feel the chemistry between the characters and the actors. And then you have some other side characters in there. You have the hippie characters or drug characters. They feel natural. One of them has a haircut that feels very hippie-like, I guess. And so, like, the characters feel like what they're supposed to be. Tommy feels like the person that would be going out with Cindy. Nick feels like the nice guy that would feel, I guess, empathy or sympathetic towards Ziggy because she's the one that kind of gets picked on or whatever the most. But she can dish it out as well, as we see in the movie. And then you also have Discount Foggy Nelson. I don't know the actor's name. I just call him Discount Foggy Nelson. He was in Halloween 2018. He just reminds me of the guy who played Foggy Nelson in the Daredevil series. And in Halloween 2018, I actually hated his character. The movie's great, but I hated his character a lot, mainly because it felt out of tone with the movie, where here, it feels perfectly in tone with this movie, and so I really enjoyed his character as well. And then another thing is, in Part 1, it felt like a PG-13 movie that was forced to be rated R, and so you just had like these conflicting tones and conflictingness to it. Whereas in Part 2, 1978, it knows what it is from beginning to end. It knows that it's just a schlock campground rated R schlock fest slasher, and it knows what it is through and through. It doesn't try to be anything else, and I'm all here for it. And then in terms of the killers, in the first movie, it was mainly like a guy in like the skull mask, and I don't have an issue with that. It looked pretty cool. But it's kind of like it's kind of like Ghostface from the Scream movies, which are great movies. Pretty much like 3 of them, or 2.5, I guess, are still better than Fear Street Part 2. But one of my issues with the Scream franchise is the look of Ghostface. It just looks like a dude in a cheesy Halloween costume. It doesn't actually look like a scary slasher killer. And so that's always been an issue I've had with those films, even though the first Scream is like a top 10, maybe even top 5 horror movie of all time. I still kind of have that small issue. And that's what the first movie had. It had something similar to that, where it just looked kind of like a guy in a cheesy Halloween costume with a mask on. Where here, in part 2, it's like this force coming at you with an axe. It's like this intimidating force. Tommy, he's this intimidating force just coming at you with an axe. And then towards the end, he gets the sack head on him. And for whatever reason, I find sack head killers to just be aesthetically awesome. I love it, the aesthetic look of a sack head killer. And I think this is the best looking sack head killer I've ever seen. It's not the best movie featuring a sack head killer, but it's the best looking sack head killer I think I've ever seen in terms of the design of the character. And then lastly, the soundtrack. Now, I will acknowledge, part 1, the soundtrack was one of the best parts. I loved the soundtrack. But a thing with it, in terms of like the score, was you'd have like the killer or whatever, casually walk by in the background, and you just get this big jump scare type of sound coming at you that I hated. Where in this, you don't get any of that type of stuff at all. And that kind of enhanced my enjoyment level for part 2 as well. And then just the soundtrack in general with the songs, I freaking had a blast. I mean, I have a ton of fun with Carry On My Wayward Son. I have so much nostalgia for that song. I used to play it all the time when I was on drumline during basketball games with the pep band. It was awesome. I have a lot of nostalgia for that. So when that came on at the end, I was just like, hell yes! And I freaking loved it. And then lastly, a lot of campground slashers generally take place before the actual camp starts, and it's the counselors getting ready for the camp, because a lot of people try to stray away from kids getting involved in like a slasher movie. And this movie does not do that at all. I mean, we've seen kids before in like Friday Part 6 and stuff, but Jason never killed kids. That was the thing with Friday Part 6. Here, the killer doesn't care. He goes and kills the kids. Even you don't actually see him kill the kids. There's usually like some kind of cutaway, or one time it's not actually a cutaway. It's more a flashlight is dropped, and so there's no lighting there, but you see a flashlight laying there. And I actually really enjoyed that, because I don't want to see kids getting killed, but I kind of like the idea of a slasher that doesn't have any morals at all. And so what circle of hell does Fear Street Part 2 1978 belong in? I was a huge fan of this. I'll be honest, it's probably my favorite horror movie of the year so far. But keep in mind, I have yet to see A Quiet Place Part 2. For whatever reason, I just haven't been able to get out to see that one. But out of the ones I have seen, which are like 16, 17-ish, and so given the fact this is probably my favorite horror movie of the year so far, I'm going to put Fear Street 1978 in the first circle of hell. I thought about putting it in Purgatorio, but I didn't want to get too far ahead of myself, and so I'm just going to place it here in the first circle at the top of the various degrees of greatness. Go ahead and tell me your thoughts on Fear Street Part 2 1978 in the comments section down below. Tell me how you would compare it to the first part in 1994. Tell me whatever you want in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this review, go ahead and smash that thumbs up icon, smash that subscribe button, hit that notification bell as well, and always have one hell of a good time.